Sebastian, welcome to the Leaders Lab. Great to have you.
Great to be here. Thank you for inviting me, Cam.
Yes, sir. Well, as we talked about in the pre-show, I've heard you on several other podcasts. Love your story. I'd love our audience to hear it. I know you're kind of as I described in your intro, you've trained over 25,000 kids in martial arts. You've got a real focus on anti-bullying. Where did all of this come from? Like, how did you grow up? How did you get into martial arts? And I'm imagining there's some stuff there in your past that might lead to your future, right?
It's always the case, right? Whenever you
Yeah,
whenever you look back, you can join up the dots and figure out why why you do what you do.
exactly.
For me, I guess martial arts was the route my parents encouraged me to go down in order to become more confident. They wanted to enroll me into a martial arts class to grow my confidence, and that's exactly what it did. I can really remember walking into the dojo for the first time and seeing the other belts there and seeing the black belt instructor and seeing just how regimented the class was. And I think as a young child, looking at that, it was quite inspiring. Martial arts has this ability to give a young person a moonshot. You have this ability to become something really exciting. You've
Was
got this
that,
ability to,
sorry, not to interrupt so
yeah, no,
quickly,
go for it.
but what age were you, and were you looking for something like that? Were you feeling like, um, I know at a certain age, I was not feeling like I was like one of the cool kids, right? And then we moved town, and then all of a sudden I was. Were you looking for a way in, and what age were you at that point?
I think I was just looking for an interesting sport to really get into. I
Yeah.
was obviously playing football like every young British kid does, and so we call it football. You guys call it soccer,
No,
but
no, I'm aware.
um,
Yeah.
so maybe your audience won't get what I'm talking about. Maybe they will,
Yeah.
but yeah. So I was playing football. It wasn't really my thing. My dad was a football coach as well as being in the army. So on the weekends he would train the football team and that sort of stuff. So he was heavily involved when he was home, right? But I think it was really my parents who were kind of opening the door and researching to find a good club as we moved homes. So I was in a military family, so we moved around a
Okay.
lot,
Okay.
and we went from place to place to place. Eventually, we settled in a rural part of England in the southwest, and it was really in this area that I found that martial arts club, and I think it was just the pursuit of a sport with the byproduct of developing confidence. I wasn't going through anything at the time. I
Hmm.
wasn't going through bullying at the time. Little did I know that martial arts club would become completely vital to my transition through bullying as a young person. So, as I grew up through the primary school age, starting martial arts at about 6, I was pretty much bullied for about 4 years. So I started martial arts and I began getting bullied. I actually got bullied for doing martial arts as well. One of the things they don't tell you is you sign up to martial arts and it's like now you're no longer going to get bullied because you're studying martial arts. Well, it actually doesn't work that way. When the bully sees you as a martial artist, it's like you're more of a threat, so they actually
Yeah.
pile on more pressure.
Or
And of
it's like,
course, at
oh,
that
what
stage,
I could see them almost going like, oh, so you think you're tough now, right? Like,
exactly,
yeah, yeah,
exactly. And it's like, oh, so now you study martial arts. It's like, okay, we've got to quickly put you in your place, sort of thing. So the bullying intensified, actually. And so I remember studying martial arts, and it was kind of escapism as a young child, 7, 8 years old, trying to escape bullying through this black belt community, right? And I got to the stage where I managed to accelerate very quickly through the grades. I was doing really well. I was competing nationally. I became a British champion in
hmm
Taekwondo. And then I would go to school and I would get bullied.
hmm
And it was like all the lessons I had learned in the dojo, I hadn't yet transitioned to the home and school life. Like in school, I was still a victim, but in the arena in the British Championships, I was a champion. And I hadn't quite transitioned. It was like that was my safe space in the dojo
Yeah, it
when I
was
was
almost like a
competing.
sport that was isolated that you were playing,
Totally.
but it
Yeah,
wasn't
yeah.
really part of your day to day. Yeah.
And I've seen this with professional athletes, believe it or not, right? Who
Yeah.
have lived their life in this professional environment but never transitioned their character to the real world. And so while I had a black belt, eventually I didn't have a black belt character. And so when I look back, I realized just how important it is to teach young people to transition the lessons from the dojo to the home and school life. That's something which took me 20 plus years to learn how to teach young people to do. And so eventually I overcame the bullying. I stood up to the bully. And I think in life, you get what you tolerate. I got to the point where I basically had enough of being bullied as a 9, 10-year-old. And, the bullying was verbal, it was psychological, it was physical. It was very physical. For that age group, it was very physical. Like, I can't imagine it ever occurring in modern schools. But in
Hmm.
this small school where there was only 12 of us in each class, it was very easy for the bullies to kind of hide what they were doing. It was something which occurred quite frequently. Eventually, I retaliated physically. I was basically tripped over playing football. My head hit the concrete. I stood up, turned around, and I hit the guy back. And I remember both of us being in complete shock about what happened. But the pecking order in the playground completely changed. Suddenly, I wasn't looked at as the victim, and the bully wasn't looked at as the oppressor. And suddenly, the pecking order had changed, right? And from that point on, I wasn't bullied anymore. And it was like the courage I had overcome the pain of experiencing bullying. It was like, if I was going to make a bold move to change my situation, that was going to be less painful than continuing the route I was going down. So
Right.
I reached my tolerance level. The same, and I look at this the same way we have anything in life which we've had enough of tolerating. It could be like you're overweight and you had enough of it, and it's like, now I'm going to make a painful decision to change my life and give up the
Yes.
things I don't want to do, or a
Yep.
toxic relationship or whatever it is. Right? You get what you tolerate in life.
Yep.
And for me, in the bullying situation, that was it. I had enough, and so I made that decision then and there, and it was
Well,
very
what you're
reactive.
Well, I think what you're really talking about too is like when you're talking about getting what we tolerate, it's also like sometimes there's enough leverage, even if it's negative leverage, to make a change, right? I mean, the leverage that you had there is no different than the person that goes, well, I'm 150 pounds overweight, and my doctor says I've got type 2 diabetes, and I'm going to die
Yeah.
20 years younger, and I'm going to have a heart attack. And it's like, no more. Like, I'm not doing that anymore, right? I'm not getting bullied anymore. I'm not going to have this weight anymore. People do it with money problems or whatever else. It's interesting to reflect back though on being however old you were at the time. It sounds like 11 or 12 years old or whatever, and really kind of knowing that then. I'm
Yeah.
curious. You said something that I don't want to miss, even though it's a little bit of a it'll be a little bit of a sidetrack, but because I've thought about this so much and I've talked to people about this so much. When you said this martial arts thing wasn't transitioning into your character, it was your words,
Yeah.
right? And I'm a recruiter by trade, right? We own a talent acquisition firm. I work with leaders. And when I can find athletes that can, let's say college athletes, let's say they played at a high level, like Division I basketball or whatever, and you think of all the things that are needed to become really great at a sport, right? The idea of team and the cohesiveness and the discipline and the working out every day and the being on time and like all these things that could just lend itself so well to like a career as an entrepreneur or as a leader for another company or whatever. And sometimes people just never make the connection. I mean, you're talking about not making it when you were a kid. I've seen people not make it when they're in their 20s looking for their first job. That being an athlete is one thing, and I'll just go apply for a job and dress sloppily when I get in there and not really bring that part of you that was the athlete in there. So I just think it's interesting that you're talking about it. And I'm always trying to draw it out of people if I see it, that it's there, because I kind of feel like you have this gear, right? Like you've been
Yeah.
there as recently as, yesterday, if they were playing their sport. Kid, if you can just get it to convert, it's like key, I think, in becoming a leader. And I think it's one of the main reasons that so many people, like your parents did, encourage their kids to get into sports, is so that it can transition into your personal character, right?
Yeah, and this is it. I mean, I know we've partnered with Olympic teams, national teams around the world, right? And we've transitioned athletes from being athletes and competing internationally as a profession to becoming full-time instructors with us around the world.
Right.
And we've seen huge challenges just moving these guys to a different country, and then them trying to find their way in the new country with very, very basic things they would
Right.
struggle so much with, because they've grown up in this bubble where, as an athlete, it's like the whole environment is designed to grow your confidence within that environment, right? It's
Yes.
like it, and that's almost like an ego thing, because
Right.
they develop the ego to the point where you're able to go and do incredibly difficult, challenging, high performance activities, but only within the safe confounds of that, square arena.
Yes. And when you're
And
being
so,
told to do it, and when someone else
right,
is
yeah,
telling you,
and
here's when practice is, here's how to show up, here's the drill you're going to run. And I think that might be
totally,
the thing, right? Is that a lot of people are trained to take orders a little bit. I mean, you mentioned being a military brat, and I'm prior military
yeah,
myself, and there's a lot of people in that environment too, where when I'm recruiting people out of there, let's say someone's an officer in, you know, either the British or the American military, and I'm getting them right as they're coming out, and I'm having a conversation with them, and I'm going, you know, tell me about your leadership style, tell me about your, you know, your skill set, whatever. And they're gonna be like, you know, of course it's an interview, so they're gonna brag about their leadership, as they should. But then the real test to me is what happens when you're not giving a lawful order, right? Like
yeah.
what happens when people get to say, "F you, I'd rather not do that," right, and walk away. And I think that's, again, just like athletes transitioning, it's the same thing. So, yeah, please continue. I think in that bubble, you're right. It makes it,
Yeah.
that's the
It's
challenge.
taken me so long to realize that that bubble even existed, because
Yeah,
most martial arts instructors think you come to you enroll a child in martial arts and they'll become confident, right? When you'll develop
right,
their character. But martial arts is not enough. Martial arts is an incredible tool. It's an incredible vehicle for developing a child's character. But the way I see character development is this: character development is a mixture of two things. It's the daily habits. It's the compounding effect of the things you do every single day, like a
mm-hmm,
martial arts class, like the way you
mm-hmm,
wake up, the routine you have, the values you live by, the foundation, right? Which is what I think our students get within martial arts. And then character development is one-off big events that are really memorable, that truly challenge you as a person. And they're typically not in the same environment where you're learning your habits or your foundation, because they have to challenge you. And within that environment, a martial artist, a one-off event, you could say, as a competition. But for me, it's got to be something outside of martial arts to really challenge the character. And I remember growing up, martial arts was the foundation of everything I did. Martial arts developed a daily habit routine for me. It gave me confidence. It gave me the ability to regulate my emotions in high pressure, high stress environments. But really taking all those lessons and then applying them in the real world is what developed my
right.
character as well. These kind of transition events, I call them. And I remember in school, I signed up to something called 10 Tours, where we did huge hikes, 30 to 50-mile hikes across some really difficult terrain as a 14-year-old, right? And it was 24 hours. You have to carry 30 kilograms, whatever, and hike over. And it was really grueling. And I remember it being really, really tough. When I look back, it's things like that that really stand out. And there were loads of things I did as a child on my own, or with my dad, for instance. We took two mountain bikes to the Sahara Desert and biked 500 miles across the Atlas Mountains for charity over 3 days. So
Wow.
it's stuff like this throughout my life. I look back at my base jumping days, and I've done over 500 wingsuit base jump and skydives around the world, and it's these big one-off moments that test your character, that you reflect back on. And it's the mixture, right, of those compounding daily habits plus the one-off events where you really get tested. That really is how you develop a person's character. And it's, martial arts is a great tool, mostly for the compounding effect of doing that on a day-to-day basis.
But I feel like that first test you got, really, or at least the first one that you truly acted on and integrated, sounds like it was that playground, right? It was with that bully. That was your first
Yeah.
fully integrated moment. What happened after that? Like, did you? Because I was in a similar situation. I'm kind of laughing because I went from being the victim to, I think, then I went like, okay, now I'm not taking shit anymore, right? Like
Mm.
it worked. And I almost created a little monster in my mind. I'm not going to say I became the bully, but I would never bully someone that was defenseless or anything like that. But I almost like sought out bullies at that point. Do you know what I mean? It
Yeah.
was like I was
Yeah.
like the guy that wanted to interfere a little bit, and I wasn't like a big guy, so sometimes that meant I'd get smacked around a little bit. But I went from like taking it to just not taking it overnight. What changed for you after that moment? Were you able to just kind of ease into it and give that guy some grace, or what happened, especially in such a small school where there's only a dozen of you in your class, and you said the hierarchy kind of changed out there.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, what changed after that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I've worked with over 30,000 children around the world, right? We teach 4,000 kids a week. I've,
Wow.
I've written a best-selling book about bullying called Not a Victim. and I've guided hundreds of parents through the transition of bullying. And I truly believe that most children, if not all children, will go through bullying at some stage in their life. Now, here's what you alluded to was really interesting. You know, you said you didn't quite become a bully after you went through bullying, but the reality from all the studies I've done is that most children who go through bullying actually become bullies themselves.
Yeah.
And I remember going through bullying myself, and you know, I can remember 4 years of pain,
Yeah.
right? And it was like you go through that, and you could hold on to such a grudge.
Yeah.
And I remember retaliating, and this whole shift happening, and all I wanted, all I wanted from that moment was peace. I didn't want to suddenly, you know, be. I think I probably enjoyed the fact that the pecking order had changed and I was no longer a victim, but I didn't want to abuse that and start bullying. Um, I guess I had good context, and I think that's because of the mentoring I had behind the scenes, right?
Yes.
I think the biggest challenge most bullies and victims of bullying go through is context. It's a challenge of context. They don't understand where it comes from, right? So they go home and the parents are immediately like, the bully's a bad person. They're evil. They're doing horrible things. They're a bad person, pointing the finger. And depending on how deep you go with this, we essentially we attract the bullies into our lives because of the elements of our own personality we don't yet love. And, you know, if you, I don't know how deep you want me to go on this, but
no, it's cool. I like it. Yeah.
It's not for
Keep
everyone.
going.
But it's like black belt content for bullying, right? I know with a lot of the parents I work with, it's like I start to yell about, work my way up. People want the vitamin before the paracetamol before the vitamin, right? But the reality is, if you really want to prepare your child for bullying, you've got to work on the context. And the context is the bullies aren't a bad person. The reality is the bully is often going through something traumatic or has done, and this is their way of manifesting that and trying to gain some sort of control in their lives.
Right.
And we've now worked with so many children through this, not just from a reactive stage of they're going through bullying, how can we help them and help them to overcome it, but from a proactive stage of we're preventing children from going through it at a really slow rate, which causes trauma, which goes on into chronic bullying. And what we found is that the knowledge we've given children from a context point of view of why bullying occurs means that they get bullied, they look at the bully, and they ask them, what's wrong?
Yes.
Why are you doing that? How can I help you? And I've actually heard of cases from 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds who have mentored their bully through bullying.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And it's just like,
I love what you're doing because there's a bit of it's not only like maturity and finding peace in it, but there's also a bit of like disassociation in it, in a traditional way of thinking, not just for a 9-year-old, but even for me, of going like, look, if I'm a kid and I show up at a new school and somebody starts picking on me and then their friends join in, like the way you feel when you're 9 years old is, you know, I'm a piece of garbage and I don't fit in and I'm not enough and all of this. And so I think immediately by what you're talking about, by having a dialogue around it, by like, look, the bully isn't a bad guy or a bad girl. They're sort of playing a part, and that part is based on these things. And you just happen to be there, right? Like you're in their sights. You didn't do anything. And I think the immediate disassociation helps with the resentment later, because it's like, oh, they didn't hate me. I didn't do anything wrong. There's nothing wrong with me inherently. Like I'm just here, and people become bullies for all kinds of reasons. I think that's really cool.
I mean, the bottom line is this, right? You know, if you look back at anything horrible or traumatic you've been through in your life, the chances are it's probably benefited you in some way.
Yeah.
As difficult as that is a pill to swallow, it's quite likely the bullying you went through as a child is the reason you're successful today in some area of your life. It's typically the things that we run from, the insecurity we run from, which give us the most fuel, the most motivation to actually make a change in our life. And you know, in the book Not a Victim, we interviewed dozens of incredibly successful entrepreneurs, sports people, and so on, who attest their success in life to the bullying they experienced as a child. Of course, that's not much comfort to a child who's going through bullying. Right, but it is to the parents, right? And one of the incredible things I've found about bullying is that it's typically not just the child. In fact, it tends not to be the child we need to work with. It needs to be the parents, because we pass on our previous trauma to our children.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's some incredible stories I found where, I spoke to one lady who was a confidence coach, and we interviewed her for the book. And she was bullied throughout her younger years because of the way she looked and that sort of stuff. And she was bullied because of that, because her mum used to always criticize her for the way she looked and what she was wearing and her weight and so on. So one of the first things I said to her when she was an adult was, speak to your mum and ask her if she ever went through bullying. She spoke to her mum. Can you guess what her mum was bullied for when she was younger? The way
Yeah.
she looked, her
Yeah.
weight, the way she dressed, and so on. And so, literally, bullying is like this dark shadow that follows us, right? And it's not about the other person; it's purely about ourselves. And we attract this dark shadow into our lives to follow us, behind us the whole time. And if we don't learn to face it as a parent, we pass it on to our children, and they then have to continue with this dark shadow which follows them.
Mm.
And so the reality is, it takes so much courage from parents to stand up and face this dark shadow behind them. That's, generational trauma, right? The things that your great parents may have said to their children, could it be influencing the way you raise your child? And you have no idea. And so for me, that's completely fascinating, because ultimately, if we can step up and have those deep, meaningful conversations, if you're lucky enough to have your parents still here, then really you've got this opportunity to kind of end the cycle of bullying. And if you look at the book, Not a Victim, it's called Not a Victim, End the Cycle of Bullying, because really it's a cycle. It's something that, it's a transition, right? It's not a one-off event. It's something that it continues from childhood into adolescence, into the workplace, and so on, and then eventually into impacting your own children. So it's a lot of my work with bullying has been down to helping parents face previous trauma and have the courage to do that.
So in your business, so I know you said you got 4,000 students a week going through your programs and everything. When you guys advertise it, is it advertised as an anti-bullying program or a martial arts program? I'm guessing it's both, but kind of like what's the your demographic is kids, right? And so what's the marketing angle? Is it
Yeah.
yeah, I guess just start there.
I mean, so anti-bullying is just a piece of the puzzle.
Right.
A child, we at the Warrior Academy work with parents to solve their biggest problems. And bullying is one of the biggest problems. So is adolescence, so is changing schools. Typically, we work with parents about transitions, right? The main objective for us is to give each child a black belt character. We don't really care about belts, although we give our students black belts after 8 years. If they work really hard, they get there, and we've developed 50 plus national champions. We don't care. It's just a piece of material. All we really care about is developing a black belt character
Love it.
for the child. And the reality of that is, a black belt character is a child who's developed high levels of confidence, conduct, and concentration, what we call the 3 Cs, and ultimately has higher levels of success and happiness in their life because of it, right? If you look at a person's character, it literally influences every single decision they make in their life: relationships, friendships, the work they choose, the passions they seek, the way in which they approach failure and success. Like, everything's down to character.
Totally.
And so for me, we're not a martial arts organization. Like, when I look at us in the UAE, right, in Dubai, we've got over 1,000 students in our program every single week, just in this city. We're the largest martial arts academy in the UAE. We've got the most prestigious team of world-class athletes who teach our program. And the ironic thing about that is, we're not a martial arts organization. We're a
No.
character development
I was just going
organization.
to say, you're a character development organization that uses martial arts as a tool to develop character. Yeah.
Precisely. And that's exactly it. Like, if you look at our adverts, I never talk about martial arts.
Right.
In none of our adverts do I talk about martial arts. All I talk about is developing the core traits of a child's character. That's what we specialize in. If you just want to focus on martial arts, there's dozens of clubs out there you can go to. But if you want to develop what's the most important aspect of a child's education, which I think is sorely missing in the educational system, which is this focus on soft skills, then that's what we do, right?
I
It's
love
like
it.
emotional intelligence. It's the leadership skills. It's the things behind the scenes that influence those decisions that I mentioned.
I love it. So I want to pick up in your, I've got a million questions for you, but I also don't want to miss the rest of your story and how you got into this. So things flip when you're younger. You're continuing to go through grade school. You're continuing in martial arts. When does this become something where, and if I'm missing anything in like your high school years or school years, please just jump in. But when does your sport become, you said it was kind of your foundationally growing up kind of your whole life, but when do you go like, this is what I'm going to be doing? And also when does this become more of a character thing than a sport thing?
So I remember traveling around Thailand when I was 19, 20 years old. For a good year and a half, I was traveling, backpacking, and I was fighting in Thailand in stadiums. So I had a decent martial arts background at that point. I was picking up work while I was traveling, and I was going to go back to the UK. I'd basically quit university in Denmark at the time where I was studying architecture, and I was in the Royal Marines beforehand. So I quit all that, went traveling, and decided to come back to the UK, and I wanted to do something physical. So I became a personal trainer. My first gig as a personal trainer was teaching Thai boxing. And I took over this club where we had underprivileged teenage boys mostly in a fairly rundown urban inner city gym. And I noticed that very, very quickly the big impact we were making wasn't so much the martial arts side. We created 12 national champions from that small group of 15 teenagers. But the biggest impact was these boys were on drugs, alcohol, sleeping rough, domestic abuse, unhealthy relationships, you name it, they were going through it, right? Just like terrible decisions they were making every single day. But within half a year, they were walking in where they would kick their shoes off and start a fight with the other boys in there. They were parking their shoes up, bowing as they entered, calling each other sir. The discipline was there, the respect was there, the moral compass was there. And I realized in that moment, martial arts is fantastic for doing this. Like, what other thing could possibly get these young men to leave behind what they were doing and focus on something entirely positive in their lives like this, right? Like football couldn't do it, rugby couldn't do it, basketball couldn't do it. Like there's nothing I could think of which really ingrains itself so much into the moral fiber of what a young person is trying to achieve. And so you've got to really dig into that. And that's what martial arts does. And I think combat does that for young men in particular, especially within that group. So I decided, look, if I could help these young teenagers, 16, 17 years old, what if I could work with them when they were 4 or 5 years old? I'd have a 10, 12-year head start on this, and I could change the decisions they made. So the compounding effect of that would be massive. So that's what I did, right? And so I started clubs working with very, very young people. And very quickly we had 200, 300, 400, 500 students around the south of England in 20, 30 different clubs all signed up. And it got to the stage where I was running the clubs really effectively. We had a small team who were helping me with it. And I got heavily into skydiving and base jumping. And so I became an extreme sports athlete alongside teaching full time. So you can imagine I've got 500 students, and at this point I've done about 500 base jumps and wingsuit skydives around the world. And I'm in Switzerland, and it's my 500 and something jump, and it's my 7th jump of the day. And I have a terrible accident where I essentially drop about 50 foot, and I break everything from the waist down, both legs, both feet, both ankles. I literally just survive, and the doctors tell me I'm never going to walk again. I spend the next 2 years learning to walk. And at that point, my professional career in martial arts is over, right? I was a professional Thai boxing fighter. I'd just come back from Thailand after competing on the Queen's birthday in a stadium in the South. And I was told I could never walk again, let alone compete, right? Or jump. So my character and the things that I had learned through martial arts are really what pulled me through that. And it's within that time that I found Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I couldn't stand up and kick and punch. So I would just do everything from the ground. And so I just, without any impact on my joints, I was just on the ground fighting 2 hours every day. Once I was, to a point where I could feel my legs again and the bones had healed, I could do that.
So you're
and
like
eventually I learned.
I'm sorry, you're like mid 20s at this point or what?
24.
Yeah. Okay.
24 at this stage, yeah. And so, I learned to walk again by the time I'm 26. I incredibly, my current wife started dating me a few weeks before the accident. So she started dating this professional fighter, martial arts business owner, extreme sports athlete. A few weeks later, bang, never going to walk again. And for 2 years, she just stays with me, right? Wow. The whole way through this. And, I have to move back in with my parents, live on the sofa bed for 6 months, all this sort of stuff. At the same time, I had a business partner who tried to steal the entire business from me. And so I was going through it, you name it, I was going through it at the time, right? Luckily on my back, I had a lot of time to think and process things and plan and have the strategy behind me. But the reality there is, I managed to get through that. And I think I draw hugely upon the character and the foundation built from martial arts in order to do that, right? Developing a daily habit routine. I've spoken about this so much in a lot of my content. It's like, if it was on the paper, it's getting done. I'd wake up and I'd write down what I needed to do to do the rehab. It didn't matter if I felt like I wanted to do it or not. It was going to happen, right? If I'd written it down, it was going to happen. I had to do so much sensitivity training on my feet to try and bring the nerves back to life. And that took 6 months just to try and feel the feet again. They didn't feel like mine. And I remember even asking the doctor to remove my feet. I said, I've had enough of this. I can't use them anymore. Just remove them. And he told me now is not the time. And I can just remember that conversation. He put his hand on my shoulder. He said, "It's not time to give up, right?" And I didn't. And I just continued from that process. I used Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to rehabilitate my whole body. And exactly, what was it, 2014? Exactly 3 years from that accident, in the same hospital where they did surgery on my feet, my daughter was born, like on the exact same date, 3 years later.
Wow.
And I realized in that moment that I can't take the same risks within extreme sports that I was doing. And so, I realized that my life didn't just belong to me, it belonged to my children. And it was a very selfish sport I was a part of. And I needed to make a future for them, which didn't involve me teaching every single day on my own. Because the reality of that is that, if I get injured, we can't earn any income as a family now. And so I decided to scale the Warrior Academy from the villages of the southwest of the UK to a global organization. And I literally made the decision then and there in 2017. And it was going to be London, because it was, nearest big city, right? Then I went on holiday to Dubai to see a friend. And I decided 2018, I was like, I think we should just go to Dubai. So after that holiday, 3 weeks later, I moved to Dubai. I said to my wife, let's move to Dubai. We did it. Fortunately, she was pretty laid back and she was up for it. So we all went over there and moved to Dubai. Me, my wife, my daughter, all in one little studio flat in Dubai. And we launched. Very quickly, I started working with the royal family, the UAE. They picked up on our messaging. I was invited to schools around the country to talk about our 4-step methodology for developing character based on the book I just written, which became a bestseller. And within the space of 2 years, year and a half, we went from no students to about 300 students in Dubai. And then COVID hit, right? COVID hit and we just lost everything. The whole business collapsed, everything collapsed. And we were charging termly at the time. So at literally the same week that we were going to be paid for the next term, everyone just stopped paying. And so we had bills going out, staff to pay, all this sort of stuff. And it was just the worst possible position you could be in as a business owner. And miraculously, through COVID, we survived. We built an incredible community online, and we went into commercial real estate. So at the same time as everyone running out of offices, we said, why don't we go into offices and build these boutique style studios designed to help children with high anxiety feel more at home rather than the big warehouse martial arts dojos that you see around Dubai. So we doubled down on that whole concept of small boutique studios with 8 to 12 students in each class. And as soon as we started investing in that, restrictions started opening, started relaxing. And we went from 200 students online to 1,000 students in person within 2 years of COVID. So that was the acceleration, right?
And when you say in person, where were you opening the studios? Are they all in Dubai, or are they in other cities as well?
Yeah. So to answer that question, right, during that moment, right, from COVID until 2022, we were in the UK. We had our hubs across the UK, and we were just in Dubai. We started with one office, and pretty much every 3 months we had another office opening up within the same building. So we've got 6 offices in a row, and we just knocked down a door between each one, basically.
Oh, cool.
And with community rooms and cafes and studios for students and this sort of stuff. So it's quite a unique space. And we've now recently launched in Abu Dhabi as well. We're about to launch in Doha in a few months' time. But one of the things that we really wanted to focus on is the scholarships. So in the UK, about 10% of our students are on scholarships. So we basically give free tuition to 10% of our students in the UK. And we do that by partnering with children's hospices, where we look after the siblings of children who are terminally ill, because they're often left out and they're not given the mentoring they need, while the whole family is focusing on looking after the ill child. You know, they go through bullying, the parents didn't even know about it. They go through adolescence and they're not getting the support they need and all this sort of stuff. So we're there to help support the family through that transition. We work with welfare officers. We work with children who are going through financial difficulties, separation, divorce, army children where the parents are going away for 6 months and they're dealing with things at home. And we get references and referrals for this. And what I noticed was that was making such a huge impact to our team working with these individuals, right? Mm-hmm. We never advertised it. It was completely secret within our organization. We've only recently started talking about it, and the stories have started to come out 10 years later. And it was, for me, I wanted to take that feeling of local scholarships, right, in those little communities we're in, and turn it into a global presence. And so around March 2022, we decided to launch the Bates Foundation, which is a charity which sits alongside the Warrior Academy, which takes the concept of the scholarships, the 10% scholarships, and is taking it globally, working primarily with children in developing countries. So we're now the goal was really within 3 or 4 years for as many students who are paying in the Warrior Academy to have the same number on a free scholarship, right? So nice. 50% paying, 50% paying. That was our moonshot. But we did it in 6 months. So Whoa. Now 6 months, yeah, I know. 6 months later, we've literally gone from having no students on a scholarship in developing countries to 2,000 children in homeless shelters, orphanages, rural primary schools, slums in Kenya and Nepal, Sri Lanka and India, soon Malawi, soon Tunisia, and soon the favelas of Brazil.
And are they learning primarily online, or what? Is it primarily online?
No, this is in person. This is in person. Wow. So I'm talking 2,000 children with Warrior Academy uniforms who train every single day with That's 20 amazing. Plus instructors that we've got in these remote locations. Like for me, it was like, I couldn't believe that it went this fast.
No, I can tell by, it's funny because we don't typically release video. It's just audio. But I can tell, if you guys could see Sebastian's face, like as he's describing it, like you can tell when someone's genuinely surprised by a thing they just saw happen, but they still can't believe that it happened. Like that's the look on his face right now. So
I mean, this is the last 6 months, right? So I'm looking at this like, and it's I look surprised when I say it because it's rare that I talk about the whole journey from start to finish, because it looks like a 5-year journey, but it's 6 months. And one of the really cool things about this is I knew that I couldn't build the charity on my own, right? So I needed to find someone who understood character development, who understood martial arts, who had a real charitable edge to them and understood charity, who had a real passion and purpose behind what they did. And so I found the regional director of one of the UK's largest army charities. Okay. And I pitched to him, look, this is what I want to do. This is going to be a 100-year plan that outlives both of us. I need someone who understands it, who would be great for this. And the person, the regional director, he had a son who was a martial artist, and he used to drive him to martial arts competitions and all around the UK. So understood the importance of character development. And that regional director was my dad. Oh, and wow. So I hired my dad as the operations manager.
You suckered me in there on that.
Okay. I got you there, didn't I? Yeah.
I was like a fish on a hook there. I was like, yeah, okay.
And so I brought my dad in, and he left the charity he was working in. He was doing incredible work there. He enjoyed lots of aspects of it, but some aspects he found frustrating. I think he wanted more freedom and flexibility, and to then have this opportunity to work with me and for me to work with him, it was fantastic, right? And I remember our first trip was to Kenya, and we flew into Kenya, into Nairobi, and I got this like rundown little Toyota, and we're a charity, right? So the whole goal is to keep costs low, and I don't think anyone was expecting me to go this budget with the trip. But this Toyota, I drove it something like 3,000 miles across Kenya, across national reserves, national parks. I took it off-roading. Some of the the first day I got a puncture. I had to change the tire. I think we had to do that a couple of times. The front end of the car fell off at one point on a motorway between the Karoo and Nairobi. But as soon as you do that in Kenya, you've got about 20 people around you trying to fix it to earn a few quid, right?
Right.
And it was amazing. I was teaching classes in orphanages and so on with, orphanages or homeless shelters with 300 to 400 kids. There was one class I did with 600 to 700 children in a primary school in Nairobi. And I mean, I don't know if anyone who's listening to this has ever taught a martial arts class of more than 20 children, you know that it can be quite challenging to keep them engaged, right? But when you've got a 600 class, of students who don't all necessarily speak great English, and it's a hell of a challenge. But we did it, and it was inspiring to say the least. To see these young people finally be able to pursue something which develops their character specifically. Yeah. So one of the really cool locations which I love that we're working in is this transition center. It was basically a homeless shelter in Nairobi, in a place called Thika. And the goal of this transition center is to take children from the streets who are 6 to 9 years old, typically boys that I saw in the class, and to help them transition to full-time education. And this homeless shelter gets 6 months with them. The government gives them 6 months, right? And then after that, they have to go to full-time education. The problem is most of these boys are addicted to drugs or alcohol. They've been massively abused physically, mentally. They don't like any form of authority. You stick them into school, the first thing they do is try and leave, try and escape, and get back on the streets. So if they just stick to the school, the outcome of their life will be so different, right? If we can just keep them there for an extra year, the reality is their life will be different. Because we know when you're transitioning from anything, it's that first year, the first few months that really determine if you're going to stay or go, right? And so the really powerful thing for me is this. We go in there and we change the way they look at themselves by giving them a new identity. And that new identity is you're now a martial artist. You're now on a black belt journey. And when they wear the uniform, they don't feel like a street kid in Nairobi. They feel like a Warrior Academy martial artist. And they earn the next belt, they earn the next belt. And by the time they go to the school, we've now got clubs in the schools. And because they are 2 or 3 belts down the line, they're now leaders within that class, right? So they've got a responsibility within that class. And so, whereas so many of these schools in Africa, that developing countries especially, they're designed to give 1 meal a day to keep the kids in. If they can give 1 meal a day to the kids, they'll most likely stay. That's the goal. But what we're doing is we're saying you get that 1 meal, but now you get something beyond food, which keeps you coming to school, right? Which really is there to set you up to change the course and the direction of your life. And if I spin right back to the beginning of this podcast, where we spoke about how character influences decisions, we've got stories in the Warrior Academy where we've helped children transition through chronic bullying, through depression, even suicide. We had one parent explain to us that we literally saved her child's life who was suicidal. And I really believe that if we can save a child from chronic bullying, from depression, from suicide, we can pull children out of poverty, not from giving them money, but by giving them the ability to help themselves, right? The Warrior Academy is all about empowerment. Character development isn't about helping someone out. It's about teaching them to help themselves. And that brings us right back to the bullying, which really it's not a victim, right? It's understanding that all the power we've got is coming from within ourselves. It's pure empowerment. And that's what character development is.
So crazy. I mean, your business was dead 3 years ago, like non-existent. And it just shows the power of I talk to leaders every week. I own a company that develops and places leaders. I don't know anyone off the top of my head, Sebastian, that's made the impact that you made in the last 3 years. That's incredible. I mean, it just really isn't. I think it shows the power of alignment too. If you draw on your own past experiences, your own gifts, the challenges that you've had from, being essentially paralyzed from the waist down, having to fight your way back, and then leveraging all of that, using COVID as a reset. And so, I mean, there were a lot of opportunities for you to be, couch bound for the rest of your life or bed bound. It's amazing to me. And I think what you're doing too is not just developing people to be better versions of themselves, but I think you're developing leaders, in my opinion, right? I mean, as these kids kind of go through the ranks there. And the other thing you were just talking about with the ones here in the States that were, really kind of coming from abusive homes and drugs and alcohol and all of that, and wanting to immediately push back on a school system or immediately push back on any kind of authority. And, as you were talking, I was thinking about it, and I'm like, they want significance. They want to feel significant. They want to feel like they matter. And unfortunately, being bad, being a delinquent, shooting someone, getting in fights, taking drugs brings you a level of significance. I mean, it's negative,
Yeah.
but it's still significant, right? I mean, the most significant you can be is powerful sometimes, right? To some people, it would be, you got to do what I say, or I'm going to,
Yeah.
do whatever I'm going to do, commit a violent act or whatever. And it's like you're giving them significance that they can relate to, even at that young and probably not best stage of their life. They can still go like, "Ooh, being a warrior sounds kind of cool. Like
Yeah.
I can get on board with that." And then behind that is, yeah, but you're going to do it the right way, right? You're going to do it in a
Yeah.
way that respects other
Yeah.
people. You're going to earn being a warrior. You're not just going to say you're a warrior because you can be violent or whatever. And that's the hook for them. I think is that you're tapping into their need to. We all have that need for significance, and then you're eventually bringing in the other human needs, like the need for contribution and the need for growth and the need for, connection and love and all of those things that you're bringing in. I think is through martial arts as they go through it. It's amazing.
Yeah, definitely. I think you really hit the nail on the head there, right? Like one of the best ways to deal with delinquency or poor conduct or poor behavior is giving someone ownership, is giving someone responsibility, right? And it's giving them the right mentorship alongside that. And I think that's the key thing, right? If you can do that, provide that mentorship with the moonshot of they're going along this journey. And that's the power of the black belt journey, because it's a very tangible physical look. This is the physical thing that you're going to achieve, and they can see the steps are very visible. It's a
Right.
very much a planned out journey, right? It takes 8 years to become a black belt in the Warrior Academy. It's like if you go to any other sport or anything, you don't have that visible journey. I think that's really, really key, especially when you're trying to inspire a young mind to grow into something, right? So I think you're exactly right. Giving that responsibility is absolutely key.
Yeah. Well, it's just amazing to see what you've done and the alignment that you have as a leader. I really appreciate you coming here and sharing with us. And I'm going to make sure. I think our audience, whether they have kids that want to get interested in the Warrior Academy or if they would like to contribute to help the foundation part of your business support more kids, we're going to definitely put all those links in the show notes. It's
Amazing.
been amazing having you on. I mean, this is our first conversation, and hopefully it won't be our last. Really a pleasure to meet you.
Yeah, great to meet you as well, Ken. Yeah, thank you so much for having me on.
Thanks so much. Talk to you soon.
Thank you, mate.